Okay, so let's jump right in. So this week, or this month, I should say, we read the Izumi Shikibu Nikki, Izumi Shikibu Diary, as translated by Edwin Cranston. Edwin Cranston was a really wonderful translator who was based at Harvard, and he's done a lot of really wonderful work, including this book. Um, and the Izumi Shikibu Diary it's a very interesting example of late 10th, early 11th century literature. This really the apex of the Heian period at this time. So I'm really excited to jump into it with you all. So just to talk about Izumi Shikibu, just to give a bit of background, we did read her before. We read her poetry in the Ink Dark Moon collection by Jane Hirschfield not too long ago, along with poetry by Ono no Komachi, two really wonderful female poets from they were both from the Heian period, but from very different parts of the Heian period. Ono no Komachi being very early, Izumi Shikibu being, as I said, at the height, really, of the Heian period's culture. So she specifically lived late 10th century to early 11th century. If memory serves correctly, I think it's like the 970s to the 1030s, if you want to be specific. But and in other words, this time period. And she is known as an incredible poet of her time. Her poetry is included in several imperial poetry anthologies. She has her own collection of poetry that is called like the Izumi Shikibu Shu, right? And it's just her poems. And she's also known for this diary. So she, in her life, shall we say, she was very promiscuous. She definitely was a woman who had many different relationships. There was this legend that she attempted to have relations with 1,000 men in the imperial court, and there are scholars that believe she was successful in this. But two of her major relationships were with these half brothers, Prince Tametaka and Prince Atsumichi. And it is the relation with the latter prince, Prince Atsumichi, that is covered in this diary, right? Um, and so her poetry is known for combining erotic or romantic longing with Buddhist contemplation. They really note how wonderful her Buddhist analogies and her Buddhist sensibility comes through in her text. And I would argue that you can see it really clearly in this diary as well. Um, she was a contemporary of Murasaki Shikibu. They were both in the entourage of the Empress Shoshi or Empress Akiko at the time. Um, and there are actually, or at least there were actually at one point, people who believe that she was the true author of the Uchi chapters, which are the last 10 chapters of the tale of Genji. Um, there are some discrepancies. There are some people who still believe this. There's other people who say no, it was Murasaki Shikibu. But I wanted to mention that because it's still something that people talk about today. Um, and just other legacies. She's been included in different collections of really wonderful poets like 36 Immortal Poets. Her life is talked about or is the subject of the no play Tolboku. Um, and she really is just renowned to this day as a wonderful poet of this time. So, major points in this story, right? It's primarily dealing with her courtship with Prince Atsumichi after Tametaka's death. Prince Tametaka and her had a very strong relationship, and it's actually noted that he fell in love with her during a time of great plague in the capital, and the plague did not stop him from trying to see her. And he would walk through the streets where there was a lot of carnage and deceased bodies and everything, and he ended up dying because of an illness. And people kind of believe that it's because he kept on seeing her despite all of this plague that was happening. Um, so she gets very distraught after his death, but after his death, she starts getting courted by Prince Atsumichi, his Tametaka's half brother. She initially uses this as a distraction, but inevitably falls in love with him. He suspects her of cheating a couple of times throughout the diary, but later they make up and they still find that they love each other. And ultimately, she moves in with him at the end, which causes strain on his marriage. But that really ends up being the wife's problem and not theirs. So that's just a brief overview. The structure of the text, this is a really interesting example of a diary because there are those who believe it's not actually a diary because it's written in the third person entirely. And not only is it written in the third person, but the perspective seems to shift between herself and other characters like Prince Atsumichi. In addition, she never refers to herself or as Izumi Shikibu. She always just refers to herself as the lady or onna in the original text. So, for a long time, this was actually called the Izumi Shikibu Monogatari or the Izumi Shikibu tale rather than the Nikki. Later, it was called a diary. So, because of all of this, there are some discrepancies in authorship. There are those who believe that Izumi Shikibu did write this and it's about her. There are others who believe that it was written by someone else, someone anonymous, we don't know, um, who wrote about Izumi Shikibu and her life and her romance with Atsumichi. Um, we don't really know which one is true. Um, it's the subject of much debate, but it's important to talk about. That's pretty much it for my presentation. I'd like to jump right into discussion.